Anyone else see that trailer for the new Doom game? Doesn't look overly doomy, does it? Reminds me more of games like Quake, Heretic, and Hexen. Hexen. Come to think of it, I'm pretty sure I've got Hexen, but I've never played it. Hold on a second. Hexen. Let's see what Hexen's like. Hello? Oh, cool. You get to select a character. That's something that sets this apart from Doom. Oh yeah, the reason I'm comparing this to Doom is that Hexen was made in a heavily modified version of the same engine. Hell, it was even published by id Software. Well, I guess it looks pretty good. What the hell? I can't strafe! What? I can't change it? The only control options consist of purely tank controls. You can either use the D-pad or the joystick. If you go for the D-pad, strafing is done by pushing the left and right bumpers. This control scheme sucks. The stick is better, but in order to strafe you need to hold down the Z trigger, which enables this strafe mode. These controls are just terrible, and they have no reason to be. This is the sort of control scheme I'd expect from the first generation PS1 controller, without the analog sticks. Even with that said, this still feels worse than that. Get ready for a tangent here, but I love the N64 controller. This thing is perfect for first-person shooters, and the console had many, yet nobody knows how to use this thing. I often see people bitch and moan about the N64 controller when it comes to FPS games. The reason? They're using the C buttons to move and the joystick to look around. The best way to play FPS games on the system is to assign movement to the left D-pad. The ideal Nintendo 64 control scheme for first-person shooters is to go with the Turok controls, but set it to left-handed, which immediately I understand will look a little off-putting to most people, but it does set it to play with the D-pad for movement, which is much more reminiscent of how controls are now. Yet this method seems to have evaded a majority of N64 users over the last 3 decades. I can't get behind these recent third-party controllers like the Tribute 64 or the Brawler 64 because they put the analog stick on the far left. I can't play FPS games with these D-pads. It ain't right. But I would love to try one of those dual stick controllers. Ultimately, there is nothing wrong with the original controller that came with the console in 1996. That's why I'm so confounded by Hexen fumbling the controls so bad. The D-pad allows for some pretty good simulation of WASD keyboard movement, yet they chose to go with tank controls. It just seems short-sighted of them, especially considering Turok and Doom 64 both came out within months of this game and had way better controls. And so far, this is the only N64 game I've played that doesn't give me the option to play with a control scheme that I personally like. This opening level is pretty weak. Compare Hexen's Winnowing Hall to levels like Duke 3D's Hollywood Holocaust or Doom's iconic E1M1. This level throws too many confusing things at you and goes on too long. Good opening levels in FPS games from this same era were short and sweet, with a relatively straightforward sense of progression. Hexen is one of those where the hell do I go games. The first stage isn't too bad, but some areas are obscured by the muddy colour palette. The level design is a source of frustration. The designers must have attended the Sandy Peterson School of Level Design, where everything must be a labyrinthian nightmare. How dare you mock me like that? The gameplay, tank controls aside, is a bit weak. Depending on what class you choose, you'll start off with your fists. This is too easy, at least at the beginning. It's easy to run up to enemies, hit them, then back off before they get you. Just makes me wish I was playing a game with good melee combat like Condemned. Certain characters begin with a staff, and similar weapons can be collected by the other ones later in the game. There's a decent variety of locations you visit, which are connected via a hub area, so luckily the whole game doesn't look identical. The performance is surprisingly solid, running at a consistent and playable frame rate. The atmosphere is cool too, with sinister music reminiscent of the work Aubrey Hodges did on Doom 64. Gothic stuff, I quite like it. Enemy design is lacking though. I have a hard time describing a lot of them without having to compare them to enemies from other games, or this dude that just looks like the Violator from Spawn. That's not to say that these are bad designs. They complement the world that Hexen is clearly trying to establish, but they aren't particularly inspired or memorable. They comfortably blend into the drab colour palette and don't exactly have that ability to pop out of the background like Doom's roster of colourful monsters do. Hexen for the Nintendo 64 and possibly the PC original fails in my eyes. It just reminds me of other games and makes me wish I was playing them. Maybe this port does a poor job at selling the game, but what little I've played of the PC version, it isn't that different, just obviously has superior controls and frame rate. As an N64 game, it falls completely flat on its face. It has the worst controls of any game on the console I've ever played, and it came out in a year saturated with awesome FPS titles for the system. It's just a tedious and forgettable experience, with a solid enough presentation that it almost makes up for its monolithic shortcomings. Well, that's about all I have to say about this game. I wonder if you can save. Controller pack. This is my least favourite thing about the Nintendo 64. Instead of having memory cards, they came up with these controller packs that are designed to go into the actual controller instead of the console. Oh well, there should be enough room. These early Nintendo 64 games don't take up too much space. I'm gonna say 2 to 3 pages. Ninety fucking pages? No.